Evening, everyone. I can see we have many participants. Um, Please let me welcome you. My name is Sabiha Alouche. I am the chair for BRISMES Outreach and Pedagogy Committee, and very, very excited to welcome all of you today for a very special event. And also very happy to be welcoming our speakers, Dr. James Downs and Mr. Francis Gotto. So today we come together for our second webinar of the year, titled What's in an Archive? The Colonial and Anti-Colonial Afterlives of MENA Archives. And I have, well, without any delay, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who's going to speak for 25 minutes. And then we'll have our second speaker who will also speak for 25 minutes. And then we would like you to enter any comments, questions you have in the Q&A. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you should have a Q&A symbol. Otherwise, it might be under the more, the three dots. And well, the idea behind the webinar today is to provide an overview of our region collection. And for that, we are our speakers who are based in the University of Durham and Exeter they're going to walk us through this basically. And the webinar is going to delve into questions related to the ethics of archival keeping, notably the question of providing support for institutions in our region. And the webinar will also offer us the opportunity to think critically about engagement with archives, as well as providing guidance and the practicalities of archive research. Our first speaker is Mr. Francis Gotto. He is the Collections Discovery Archivist at Durham University Library Archives and Special Collections, formerly responsible for the Sudan Archive from 2016 to 2024. Alongside the responsibilities of a new role at Durham, his interests continue to include expanding the Sudan Archives collections, increasing their accessibility online, and building collaborative partnerships with researchers and repositories of related records around the world. Welcome, Francis, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my presentation. So I want to start by thanking you, BRISMES, Sabiha, Amy, and Rosa, and everybody attending for inviting me to speak today. The presentation is going to give you an overview of the collections here at Durham. I'll move quite fast, but as I go, occasionally you'll see a QR code in the corner of the screen, and that's to enable you to use your phone to jump to a particular item or page that I'm displaying. Sometimes it'll be to the image, digitized image of a collection item. Sometimes it'll just be to the catalog if we haven't digitized the item. So I'll give you an overview of some of the collections that we hold, and then I'll get into some of the challenges that I've encountered and that I think researchers encounter using colonial archives. And part of the purpose of that is to raise issues, kick off some questions that I hope will come from you, and which I look forward to answering at the end. So if you're wanting to have a very brief overview of the collections that are most of interest to this society, then I suggest this is a good page to start. It links through from this page to what we call collection level descriptions, which are short summaries of each of the collections in this region. And then looking through the highlights of what we hold, we had a School of Oriental Studies here, founded in 1951, and that built an Oriental library and also some manuscript collections. And while that school doesn't exist anymore, its collections do and have been merged in with the other collections. And so we have a miscellaneous collection of manuscripts from 19 or 20 different languages, going back to the 15th century. The provenance of much of that material sometimes is quite unclear, sometimes quite controversial as well. In addition, we have the Grey family papers. That's a large northern family. They have a prime minister amongst them. It made the Reform Act in 1832, but they had a lasting interest in international affairs and satellite members of the family as well. So John Ponsonby was ambassador in Constantinople for that period. And Lord Cromer's past will be well known to most of you, I'm sure. Their interests extend beyond the MENA region, so essentially anywhere where the British had an interest, they would have paid attention. And some of them were particularly interested in the anti-slavery movement, for example. Then we have the Sudan Archive, the largest collection of which is that of Wingate, who's Governor General, the second Governor General after Kitchener. He then moved to Egypt for a brief period. This Sudan Archive is a large group of collections, I suppose, more than 500 now. And the collections don't just relate to Sudan. So this is a matter, of course, of international relations. The neighboring countries are often covered there too, but also staff in the different branches of the government went on to work across the Middle East, particularly. We also have quite a large collection of the papers of the last Khedive of Egypt, Abbasimi II, with some magnificent photo albums, of which you'll see an example in a moment. A lot of that material is in Arabic or Ottoman Turkish as well, French, Greek, German, all kinds of languages. And his political interests continued long after he was deposed. A collection of E.T. Richmond, we'll see another example of that in a moment. A very varied career, but ended up as Director of Antiquities in Palestine. Harold McMichael, he was in the Sudan, so his collection is amongst the Sudan archive, but he then went on to become High Commissioner in Palestine. Malcolm MacDonald, he's the first of these who actually have a connection with the university. He was a chancellor of this university for a time, but he had a long, varied career in international affairs as a diplomat, including a period where he paid particular attention to the Palestine issue in the 30s. Anne Lambton, renowned historian of land reform in Iran, acted for a very long period. We hold nothing in the collection, unfortunately, relating to her, other activities. Have a large collection of a man named Bahi Petrosian, again relating to Iran, and another Iranian collection, an anthropologist, David Brooks. And then collections of diplomats. Another diplomat, Sir Donald Hawley, started his career in Sudan, but then had a long and successful career through the Middle East as well. And this is not to forget that while it's not an archival collection, in the main library, there's the Middle East Documentation Unit, which is grey literature, essentially. So that's quite ephemeral sometimes, official publications with very small print runs. And so much of the material is, in fact, very, very rare. I won't speak to this slide, just to give you a picture of colonial collections outside of the region that you're most interested in. A copy of this presentation, I think, can be made available afterwards, so you can follow up if you want. The one collection at the bottom there is part of his career. Roy Gazard, he was working on redeveloping a part of Muscat in the 1980s. So moving to look at some of the items in the collection. So I've just got a handful of items to show the range of material that we might hold. So this is in that Oriental Manuscripts collection that I mentioned. So if you, just to repeat one more time, if you click on the QR code, then it'll jump to the digital image of that item. And there are links from that item to the catalog if you want to then explore the collection in more detail. This is from the Ponsonby collection and a letter from one of his correspondents in the 1840s in Iraq. And it has quite a lot of detail in it, clearly, about local prices and taxes. This is from another part of the Gray collection. It's a diary. It's quite non-typical for that collection in that General Charles Grey was traveling and he wrote a diary, and in this case he's documenting a fire in Pera, just Constantinople, in 1831. It was a document of the month a few years ago, which is why it was transcribed. That's not digitized, I'm afraid, so that'll just take you to the catalogue. It's an example from the Abercrombie II papers. So there's a whole file, or two files even, of copies of signed petitions following the Deng Xiaowei incident. An example from the Wingate papers. He had a very wide and broad circle of correspondence, and as is quite typical of the day, it's often hard to distinguish a official letter from a semi-official letter from a personal correspondence. In this case, he's writing to the one of the personal secretaries of the king, and he's talking about the impact of the Arab revolt in India and Afghanistan and further afield. This is the Richmond collection, which I mentioned earlier. Yes, as I said, he was increasingly uncomfortable acting as a political officer of Arab affairs in that period, 27 to 1930, I think it was. And in this case, it must have been earlier. In this case, yes, it's 1922. He's almost turned this into an indictment. So he's reporting what's happened in the year, but then he rather cleverly turns this paragraph here to mentioning unfortunate tendencies of his office over the previous year, which much of it sounds quite familiar today. The I've just here highlighted Sudan maps, but the archive contains a large number of maps. The Sudan ones are unusual in the proportion of them that has been digitized. So we have the 1 to 250,000 series, national series there, and then a whole series of thematic maps as well. Photographic collections. So there's some really rich, wonderful photographic collections here. This is from one of two albums documenting a Hajj in 1909 by the Egyptian delegation. And they're both all available online. The collection also has lots of family albums, so portrait photographs, which are magnificent for recording the costumes that people were wearing, you know, the fashions. There's cinefilm too. So in the Sudan archive, there's 150 such films, and those have been digitized. There are more still to do, in fact. Often the quality of such films is not very good. And then there are, unusually for an archive perhaps, there are museum objects associated with the Sudan archive too. So that's the only one really of our collections here at Palace Green Library, which has lots of objects attached to it. Objects range from kind of colonial society objects like a tea set, which was given to us recently, or uniforms, boots, rifles, to the kind of trophy objects that you might expect in a colonial archive as well. So things seized in battle on occupying a country. The second item is one of those. This is from the collection of Rudolf von Slatten. Some of you may know his story. He was a governor of Darfur just prior to the Mahdist revolt, and then was captured and imprisoned for 10 years and then escaped. And so his, reportedly, the leg iron that he had to wear for a period at least is amongst his collection. He kept it. So moving on to the challenges, I thought I'd address first the challenges that I've observed from among researchers who try and use the archive. And the first challenge is finding the material that they want to use. And there's lots of barriers in the way of that, not least things not being described as people expect, or even being described in a uniform fashion. So in some of our archives, you're looking at generations of archivists who have described things differently over the 50, 60, 70-year period. And adding indexing terms, controlled indexing terms, can really help in that way. And it allows then groups of records to be pulled together automatically through our catalogs. We can also enable users to make their own thematic arrangements of records in another way. So users can export data from our catalogs and rearrange them as they like. And then we're not doing this yet, but I'm hoping we're going to get there. We can, well, archives can publish collections online and allow communities, individuals to begin to annotate those descriptions or those digital objects. And that creates a kind of conversation around the significance or sometimes the correctness of a description. Another way to allow people to use our data in ways that they might like, or to combine it with other data that we might not be able to imagine, is to use Wikidata. So quite recently, I've uploaded, I and a colleague have uploaded all of our collections into Wikidata. So this data you can see here is what's recorded in Wikidata at the moment, and they might be enriched. Each record might be enriched a little further with more information, but it's now in a international community of researchers and users. So this can be enriched by anybody, and people can add linking data in any way they like. So it can be a very powerful way of expanding use and understanding of these collections. In time too, there's a new standard of description in archives called Records in Context, released by the International Council on Archives. And if that's widely adopted, and that is an if, but if it is widely adopted, then that will make that even more powerful, because it allows archivists to reflect the different contexts that one record may have, the different lives, if you like, that a certain record institutions associated with a record might have. And I think users will appreciate that when it is implemented. Additionally, if you think about the problem of language and transcription of foreign languages into English, which can be quite variable and unreliable, you can skip that process by geocoding archives, so adding coordinates to items. And what that can then do is allow people to search for material on a map. So they don't need to put any language in, they can just draw a bounding box, and then that will send a search query across our catalogs for all records within the coordinates of that box. Digitization, of course, can be a great way of making our collections more accessible. We've been doing that for a long time now. It reduces the distance. Obviously, it's not the same as being able to handle and look at the physical records. But what it does allow is quite more and more versatile reuse of items. So there's a standard called IIIF, or the International Image Interoperability Framework. And what this allows you to do is to take advantage of institutions who are curating digital images like these, and anybody can, using a browser or a canvas, if you like, they can pull down images from this institution and that institution and then put them on the screen together or in an article that you're writing, and you can make great comparisons between items. To give you an example of how it might work, this is a map in the Library of Congress. At the bottom of that record, if it's IIIF compliant, you'll see a link to a manifest. So that hyperlink can then be pasted into, this is a screenshot, this bottom bit here is a screenshot from Mirador viewer. So you paste that in there, load it, it appears on the menu. And then in the viewer, it can sit alongside an item in another collection. In this case, this is a Durham item, and this is that Library of Congress map here. Or you can just drop it into a post that you're made in a blog or a social media posting. And you can either just drop the image, or if you put it in an iframe, you can drop the whole loader in. So that what that means is you have the image transformation tools like making a negative image or changing the color balance and things like that. That's all within your own digital space. And the advantage of doing it using these IIIF manifests is that you're not essentially publishing the material yourself, because it's already published on our server. So you're kind of citing it. And so you don't need our permission to do that. So the reason we do that is it makes it much more flexible for people to move to cite material. So returning here. So people can then also pull together their own, if you like, virtual collections, either of groups of records from our collections, which they think should be in a thematic group, or can pull collection items from around the world and create a virtual collection for your own institution, if you like, your own virtual institution. Other work that I do is running reviews of catalogs for harmful and outdated language. That's becoming standard across the sector. We meet quarterly to look at instances of that when things are flagged to us or when we come across them in our own practice. An important piece of work is to survey user experiences. So I'm very aware that of all the communities that or stakeholders that have an interest in our collections, how they access digital content varies a lot. And in some contexts, it's very expensive. So a lot of these models like IIIF, they've been kind of created in contexts where there's no extra cost to download lots of data for most of the users. But in some places, every byte that you download, you pay for. And so to constantly go back and reload these objects can be expensive. So we need, in some places, I think we need to find a better way of delivering digital content than we do currently. Another thing I've noticed amongst users is when I'm working in search rooms is a kind of disorientation that you sometimes see. So there's a large group of people who may be using the archives for the first time, and they're unfamiliar with what the demands of using search material. And so it may mean that they have unreasonable expectations, or just essentially don't know what the right thing is to do. And a big part of how we run the search room is to try and make it as welcoming and easy experience for users. One thing I found challenging is that some users, they're not coming as academic researchers at all. They're coming as, well, some as local historians, some as family historians, and they're not coming for facts, if I can put it that way, but they're coming for an emotional experience. It's part of a journey they're on. Or they're creative artists, and their interactions with items is not following the pathways that I've been trained to expect. And on occasion, that can be challenging. People may want to handle material in ways which normally wouldn't be possible. And so it takes some preparation and negotiation, if you like, to work out a way that works for everybody. And I'm very aware that there's lots of rules that people encounter when they come to use our archives, and laws that we have to notify people of, which can feel rather opaque to people, and it's not clear why something can't be done or why something costs more. And quite rightly, people, particularly consulting colonial collections, can object to having to pay to access the material at all. The copyright rules also impose obligations on reusage sometimes, and that too is a complicated area, even for archivists to negotiate. So my aim is to enable inclusive, efficient, self-led access and use to suit user needs. but achieving that is not always easy. So the challenges that I face as an archivist, I wanted to start off with a kind of recognition that archivists, well, that there is enduring damage from colonial violence, and having the collections here is doing damage by their absence in other contexts. And also, I have a fear that those displacements is causing irrecoverable damage. And there have been repatriations and returns, but I'm wary of expecting the item to perform in the same way, having been returned to its original context, because of course those societies have changed and the object has been reinscribed with new meanings by different societies as well. So I think with all of the work that we do as archivists and perhaps academics too, and there's a lot of analysis of the original context of some of the events around the creation of colonial archives. At the end of the day, I think that you have to recognize that material has been lost, if you like, the damage is irrecoverable. So particularly controversial and problematic material might be medical and photographic items where the consent of the subject was not given. How that is handled here is, on occasion, there have been classes, for example, where the students are specifically studying this point about photography and lack of consent. And so in one instance, images that were controversial were placed face down, and the students were challenged before they might look at an item to make an argument, if you like, to themselves as to why they really needed to see it. Some medical material isn't shown at all. So a lot of our photographic collections have been digitized, but they won't be on the databases. That doesn't mean they're not inaccessible to researchers, but an argument would have to be made to justify access. And then, of course, going through the files, researchers will come across paternalistic and racist attitudes, and that page after page, that obviously has a damaging effect too. Files too can be full of incorrect or misleading information. There is a habit of regarding documentary evidence as more significant, if you like, than oral evidence or traditions. And particularly in colonial archives, people ascribe an authority to them, which is sometimes misplaced. On occasion, there's ritual or secret information in the files. This is a worry for me because these are societies about which I know almost nothing. And so I'm unlikely to flag that this material may be sensitive. On occasion, an anthropologist, if it's an anthropologist's collection, will have flagged this and said not to be published or not to be shown. But that's unusual. And so consultation with source communities is often an essential step for releasing certain material. But then another challenge is then how do you find knowledgeable people in those communities who can reliably give you this information? And here I step back one point to the earlier point about the irrecoverable damage. A lot of this information is now lost. There is also, in some collections, a lot of personal data. I'll give you another example. These are law reports in the Sudan archive. In the 60s, the Ford Foundation paid for a series of volumes of law reports. And I think about 1,000 cases were published in 7 volumes. In a collection here, we have about 2,000 cases, which were collected by a man named Hayes in the course of this project in order to edit up cases for publication. And the case on the right is quite typical in that you can see under the heading held, as in the judgment was held. This is an appeal, I think. Yeah. You can see it's a very interesting research collection in that you're seeing the application of different kinds of law in Sudan. And Egyptian law is being cited here, but in fact, as it says, the English judges should in any case generally follow English law. So how you see judges wrestling with applying English common law to Sudanese society is very interesting. And they often fall back on this phraseology of something was in accordance with equity, justice, and good conscience when they can't find the right answer. But the challenges such cases include are that the cases go up to the 1950s. Some of them include children. These are both criminal and civil cases. And so some of the subjects in the cases may still be alive. There are no judgments, or often the judgment is lacking, so you don't know the outcome of the case or the guilt of any of the parties. So access to these records has to be controlled. And that doesn't mean that they're inaccessible, but anybody using the collection at the moment has to sign a confidentiality agreement. It suffers at the moment from the fact that it's uncatalogued largely. And cataloging such a large body of material is now possible with AI and other tools. But again, that's the application of a technology, kind of experimental technology, if you like, across a collection where, again, consent is missing. So consultation is necessary. I'm going to skip ahead because I realize I'm running out of time. But have a look at these points, and if you want to ask any questions about them at the end, then please make a note of them and ask, and I'll speak more about them.
Fantastic.
Give me just one more minute.
Sure.
This is a good point, how to facilitate equitable engagement. So that's not something archivists are used to doing, and it's often something developed in collaboration with communities, and having time, it's often difficult to find, to develop relationships and build trust. And that's a goal of mine here at Durham. One more item to mention is post-custodial curation. And this is just one example of that, where digital copies of Malaysian and Singaporean records were shared with National Archives Singapore and this university in Malaysia. And you can see how each of them are providing and editing the catalogue information to their own purposes, if you like. So in the case of National Archives of Singapore, they only extracted from the catalogue things that they thought were relevant to their readers, whereas in Singapore, they put it all in. So again, that's a final slide, which I'll leave there. Points for discussion. Sorry to have run out of time.
Sorry to jump in, actually, Francis. Thank you.
Okay.
That was great. And maybe we can keep this slide a little bit while I introduce our next speaker, because I think this is a question in particular that we're all interested in, right? Whose archives are they indeed? So thank you, Francis. And may I, ask our audience as well to help me in welcoming our second speaker, Dr. James Downs. Has been an archivist of the University of Exeter's Middle East collections since July 2018, responsible for the 60 or so MENA-related archives within the university's 500 collections. He's also librarian for the Arab World Documentation Unit, AWDU, housed within the Institute for Arab and Islamic Studies, and project manager for the Digital Archive of the Middle East, DAIM. Having spent 4 decades working in archives, museums, and special collections, James has published 3 books and around 70 periodical articles and reviews in journals including Ancient Egypt, the INNAS Review, Magdalen College Record, British Catholic History, Photographica World and Studies in Photography on various aspects of the history and photography and visual culture in both Britain and the Middle East, book illustration, monasticism, and antiquarian scholarship. James is a fellow of the Royal Historical Society and a member of the British Institute for the Study of Iraq, as well as the British Society for Middle Eastern Studies, BRISMES. And he's a colleague actually with me at the Institute. And I just remembered that I completely forgot to introduce myself. Please forgive me. But anyway, welcome, James, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to share my slides. Do that. Hopefully is that all visible? Yep, great. Well, Francis has covered a lot of the topics very thoroughly. I'm going to take a similar approach, going through kind of very rough, quick overview of some of our archives here at Exeter, but also dealing a little bit more with some of the process of the archives, of how we've acquired these things, some of the narratives behind them, and how we deal with them in terms of day-to-day research, engagement, teaching, and ongoing strategies, particularly working with other archives and institutions in the region. So, rather like MEDU Durham, we have two large collections here. We have over 500 separate archives down in the old library, 60 which relate to the Middle East, which I look after, and the Arab Documentation Unit up at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies. Sabina and I are often there. So these two buildings are 5 minutes apart. AWDU, like MEDU, is not an archive as such, and a sense too of how to define what an archive is. We have a quite precise meaning professionally that it is these are records or papers that have been produced by an individual or an organisation as part of their routine day-to-day activities, and then at some point later on have been decided to be of historical value and have been collected and preserved for posterity and for historical research purposes. Before special collections was set up in the early 2000s, a lot of our Middle East archives were actually kept at AWDU, which moved around different buildings during history. I'll explain a bit more about history later on, but a lot of our archives were then moved into special collections later on, having begun at AWDU. So AWDU holds a lot of grey literature, but also is very closely connected with the archives. The two are interrelated, and they both are very valuable collections in their own rights. So very quickly, just an overview of sort of materials. There's a very large range of different media formats, types of documents. We have over 100 Arabic manuscripts come back to the early 17th century, but 1622 is our earliest. Material in many different languages. Exeter is a fairly modern university, has only received university status in 1955. We're based in the southwest of England. Exeter is not known for its ethnic diversity, shall we say, and these sort of things do shape the material in that a lot of the material from the region has been gathered by Western diplomats, journalists, travellers, explorers, politicians, campaigners, activists, who've gathered material as part of their research of living or working or campaigning in the region. That's not to say that it is all purely from a kind of colonial or Western perspective. One of the things that sets archives apart, Middle East archives here from the other archives, is that there's a lot of material from the region has been gathered and integrated with the archives during the process of their creation. So a lot of material on the oil industry, the cassette tapes. We have large photographic collections, everything from glass slides, full plate glass slides in the Imperial Institute, to smaller magic lantern slides, prints taken, photographic prints from revolutionary activities, as well as albums, transparencies. A lot of architectural material, things on town planning, studies of buildings, urban development, development plans from the Gulf region in particular, again, in a range of different languages. And we do have a lot of revolutionary material as well. It's one of the Exeter's strong points has been partly through the Gulf Committee, which is that set up in the early 70s by Marxist left-leaning academics and activists who were supporting revolutionary movements in the Gulf, particularly in Dhofar, the Popular Front, but also in Bahrain and elsewhere. And all of this revolutionary material, which was under threat in country of origin, was deliberately sent to Exeter for safekeeping to make sure it wasn't destroyed by the more authoritarian governments against who these people were resisting. So we have gathered a lot of material, and this is reflected too in some of our archives as well, which I'll come to. So we don't have such a strong colonial content as Durham, but that is, there's elements of that, and often quite complicated, more nuanced narratives behind some of these collections. We do have some of very standard kind of British administrative historical material, papers of William Luce, Charles Belgrave. We're both heavily involved in Gulf administration, very different characters, very different roles. And their archives include, massive detailed papers of confidential negotiations for the creation of the United Arab Emirates in the early 1970s, and also private diaries, artwork, correspondence with other Gulf officials, military officials. John Crusoe was worked for Middle East Economic Digest. He was born in Kuwait, British born and raised, and then became the Iraqi specialist for Mead from 1979 to 1991, when he was killed in a car crash at quite a young age. And the archive was very well organised under his own arrangement, alphabetically covering a whole range of different topics of life in Iraq during the 1980s. Very strong Baghdad Reserve press cuttings, all his own notes, photographs, correspondence, and other material. So a lot of different individuals have gathered material from different backgrounds that has come into our archive. Nasser Ayoubi was an Egyptian academic here at Exeter. Did a lot of work on Egyptian bureaucracy administration, and became versed in democracy, and latterly a lot of work on political Islam, in his books, and Islamic movements within Egypt, Muslim Brotherhood, and so on. We have a large collection of his papers and correspondence with other academics in the region and in the West as well. We began, Exeter's collection really began as a kind of Gulf centre. So in 1979, the Gulf Research Centre was set up, the first one in the UK. And AWDU was originally the Gulf Documentation Unit, set up in 1980, began gathering material, primarily social science material, straight afterwards, primary sources. And that's gradually grown to be a collection of 100,000 items. A lot of them very rare, often the only collections in existence, certainly often the only ones in the UK. But over the time, the Gulf, Palestine, and Kurdish studies have become our three main research focuses here at Exeter. And among our 60 or so archives, we have about 16 here relating to Palestine. A lot of these are connected with people who worked for CABU, as a Council for the Advancement of Arab-British Understanding, founded in 1967 to push back against ignorance and hostility towards the Arab world in the wake of the Six-Day War. People like the Richmonds, Michael Adams, and others, Harold Dowding, and we're all involved in the CABU and also in the Palestine Studies Trust and other overlapping organisations. Harold Dowding was a military officer who served the mandate, then was married with the daughters of Tawfiq Canaan, and was also a legal executor for the Citrus Palestine Company, trying to recoup assets from Palestinian businesses after 1948. So a lot of these archives built up through kind of close personal connections in individuals and the good work they did together. Some of our material goes back to an earlier date with the Al-Azmar brothers, and this came about. These are actually photocopies mostly of thousands of documents by these two brothers who were active in the Arab nationalist movement, 1920s and 30s, right through to the 50s, in Syria and Palestine, Iraq, Lebanon as well, and Saudi. And this came about through one of their grandsons was actually teaching here in the 1980s, and he's since come back and donated some actually original materials as well, some original handwritten letters and photographs. So it's a The original documents are actually kept in the National Archives at Damascus. Obviously, they've been inaccessible for many years, and at what point they may become fully accessible, obviously, is fairly uncertain, even at this point as well. Another part of the archives mentioned Michael Adams, connected with Kabu. Again, a journalist who was heavily involved in campaigning with the Palestinian people over many decades. The archive contains a wealth of his own writings, correspondence, but also photographic material, some quite rare, correspondence with many different Palestinians, and material raised from campaign literature, and from his travels, and often handwritten notes as well. He was one of the very few people trusted to go and mediate for the hijacked airlines in Jordan in 1971 during the Black September. And we have his original handwritten diaries from that account as well, of him in Amman and so on in Wakefield. Elawezi was another character connected to this group. He was a student of Michael Adams, and he was studying the members of the Muslim Brotherhood who'd fought in Palestine during the 1930s and 40s, and he interviewed about 200, I'm not sure how many, but there's over 240 tapes of his own personal interviews with these elderly members of the Brotherhood, going back, reminiscing about their time, and also there's a wealth of information on Palestinian music, on sermons, material, and digitizing part of this as well. Again, this is one of these areas where there's often contested and quite sensitive material has been recorded as part of the archive, which does create some sensitivities regarding access and use as well. Mentioned Harold's styling earlier, and part of his family connections to brought in various maps from the Mandate era, again, which we've all been digitized. Another of our Palestinian collections is from Yaakov Harben Firestone, who's an anthropologist. He was working at Arabe, the village near Jenin, in 1969 and 1972, and gathered a large amount of ethnographic material. A lot of his copies of birth and death records, school registers, Ottoman land registries, going back, there's various maps, materials. And this is, again, there's a sensitivity there. There's a wealth of personal information all about genealogical data, relationships between people, a lot on animal husbandry practices, on land registry and land transfers. And I think it was actually the BRISMES conference a couple of years ago. I did an archive display for members of the conference. And amongst the people who came, I produced some of this material for the archive workshop.
James, we lost you the last 5 seconds with the audio.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me
all
now?
good now. All good
Yeah.
now.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right, sorry. Just to repeat that, yes. So I produced this material for the BRISMES archive workshop to conference a couple of years ago, and there was a grandson of one of the families who appears in these records attended the archive and saw his grandfather's name, and we had this obviously awkward situation with so many archives where we're holding material that is no longer available in the region, and we have information, personal data, valuable historical records here that are not accessible. And so how do we actually engage with that issue? How do we make this material accessible? I've since been in touch with other family members of the villagers here and shared material with them. But again, you have this complication, and there's a lot of material here embedded that's from other people as well. So how do you actually deal with the kind of user consent, sharing sensitive data, and navigating this imbalance is built up due to the historical power relations and different activities. Although a lot of our archives have been acquired through people who are not official colonial administrators, they're as private individuals, as researchers, as campaigners, as oil industry employees, there's still a sense of privilege and an imbalance of power in the way in which some of these materials have been accessed, in the way in which these people have been able to travel around the region and engage and communicate with other people. And the challenge as an archivist to try and deal with that, push back against some of these issues and find ways around it. Another interesting one is a much more recent archive from one of our academics who's now a freelance consultant, and includes historical material relating to the study of the city of Jerusalem, Al-Quds. Also, it's quite recent and very sensitive material about negotiations between Palestinian and Israeli groups, his involvement in training. And again, this is there was some discussion about access. Some of the material is under embargo for just a certain number of years to allow sensitivities to settle. And one discussion that came up was about access, how this material might be used, how it could be misused, and some of the risks of our fairly open access policy for material of this kind of nature. Very large photographic archive, Chris Kuchar Archive. And Chris Kuchar is not a real person, so a joint pseudonym by two people, photographer and journalist, husband and wife, who work together. They maintain full creative control of their work. He provided the words, he would provide the images. And in the process of digitizing almost 100,000 photographs from the Chris Kuchar archive, which go back to 1970. About a quarter of the archive relates to Kurdistan, both in the 4 different countries, as well as the Kurdish diaspora. There's also material in the Gulf, Palestine, Syria, and elsewhere, plus over 150 notebooks, personal diaries of private conversations, which were the basis for published articles, but also contain a lot of sensitive personal information that was kind of filtered out or anonymized for publications. Again, there's sensitivities there, also wealth of really, really very interesting records there too. As I said, Kurdistan is one of our very large study areas too. One of our most important archives is the archive of Omar Sheikh Mus, who was a founder of the PUK, the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, one of the 2 large political parties. His archive is very large, divided up into these different areas, and also there's a wealth of other newspapers, periodicals, books that came with the archive, which are in the Kurdish section at AWDU. And it covers a whole different history of the Kurdish political movement, primarily different political parties, early PUK, KDP papers about the 1950s. And he was also personal advisor to Imam Jalal Talabani, president of Iraq, a couple of years, and there's private correspondence with the Talibanis and others too. So it's a very large archive, over 10,000 documents, 12 different languages, which presents its own challenges. I do have other various archives of Kurdish interest as well, Crusoe, Wilkinson, Chris Kuchar, as well as old material and special collections from early military history of Iraq in particular. Oman was again another area. People have been working in Oman, different collections of British advisors in the oil industry, intelligence work, and there's manuscript material, again, photographs, intelligence records, military material, legal documents as well. And as I said, we do have a very large collection of material from the revolutionary movements in Dhofar, in Oman, the Popular Front. Over 500 of their documents have been digitized. And again, quite a lot of the material does provide insights into Oman from the other perspective as well. So we do often gather material from different perspectives, allows a chance for people to work together and connect it. Durham doesn't have all Sudan material. We do have different kind of archives here. These are from Swim and Luce. And Luce's papers on the Gulf came here, but his collection was split, and the Sudan papers went to Durham. We do have a small amount of material from Luce's early history, so a few appointment diaries, not much else. But Glenn Balfour Paul, like Luce, worked in the Sudan political service in the 1950s. He also served there in the military in the 1940s during World War II. And there's a couple of hundred letters between him and his parents. He was an artist and a poet and writer and traveller, antiquarian. And it's got a very interesting material from Darfur, in that area. He did a lot of research into antiquities, and his material is still of historic value for Sudanese scholars now working on the archaeology of early mosques and architecture of buildings. His photographs and very beautifully drawn maps and illustrations and plans are of interest. Other material too in Sudan, we have material in the Nubian language and also Sudanese legal cases, which kind of relates to the case one that Francis mentioned. Iranian material, we have again quite a large collection of this from the Cultural Archive. Peter Morris was gathering more copies of material going back to the 19th century, Iranian Afghanistan, as part of kind of a survey of material, but we do have much more political material on Iran in the Sheikh Mus Archive and some other collections. And in terms of recent acquisitions, fairly recent one was Hassan Arab Archive. He's a complex character in many ways. He was a Iranian newspaper, a journalist, an editor, businessman, very much pro-monarchy, worked with Anne Lambton during World War II against the Nazis. And this is a photograph of him, this him in the background there, having just captured a German spy, Franz Meyer, in Tehran. And they were holding around his neck because they were scared he might have a poison capsule to take. He was involved in anti-Nazi activities during the war, then afterwards, very much anti-communist, very much beaten up by Tudeh party, was almost working as a freelance spy catcher for the Shah. Then after 1979, exiled to London, where he spent the rest of his life campaigning against the Islamic Republic, particularly human rights abuses. And he produced thousands and thousands of letters, sending them to other Iranians, to British politicians, Americans, doing montages of cartoons and photographic, producing his own newspapers as well to try and campaign against IRI and its oppression as he saw it. And this fairly recent archive acquired from his family just a few months ago, and a most recent one, this Iranian archive, which just literally unpacking the last couple of days, it's coming in. For the Communist Party of Iran, the Marxist-Leninist Maoist movement. So again, this is a quite large, complex archive that's been preserved over many decades underground by surviving members of this movement who were obviously persecuted after the Amal Uprising in 1982. And the document contains a wealth of material on their underground political activities, including the trial and execution of many of their members, but also international affiliates right across South Asia and Europe, internal documentation, publications in many, many different languages, and also material too about their communications and activities. So we have a lot of, in contrast to the more colonial material, which deals with kind of Western administration of the region, we do have at Exeter a lot of underground revolution material from the region by people who are pushing back against the colonial power structures as well, which allows something that these two archives often interact and overlap and allowing to analyse events from the two very contrasting perspectives. So a bit mentioned about AWDU, I guess not technically an archive, that does contain a lot of semi-archival material, a lot of grey literature like Midu and ephemera, and often material there is often closely connected with the archives, because the people whose archives we have, the ones who gather material that ended up in AWDU as well. The two collections do interrelate. There's material like this. These are boxes of material from the Palestinian elections in 1996. Andrew Ellis, who's the man in the photograph there, he was tasked with setting up the election, organising and supervising them over the years. And he preserved this material and passed this to me a few years ago. A very interesting collection, which gives lots of insight into the actual practicalities of running the elections. And Yuri Davis, whose archive we have not yet catalogued, it's incredibly large and was until recently fully closed. We've now managed to negotiate a release on that. Another complex character, and his personal library is in AWDU and relates to the archive. So the DAME, the Digital Archive Middle East, which I hope many of you will have come across, I know those who have not, maybe afterwards can look it up. This is digitized material from both the archives and from AWDU. There is thousands of items there, more going up almost every day. This morning, I digitized 9 Iraqi opposition newspapers, did the metadata in English and Arabic and uploaded them. They're now on this afternoon. So everything's in English and Arabic, metadata, Kurdish where relevant, and you see the map there, which gives them the representation. You can search by map, search by subject, you can browse by category or item sets as well. The digitization work, we have 2 digitization workstations. It was just me at the start, had a team last year. It's back to just me just now again, but we're hoping to get some more staff hopefully this year. We're uploading material, as I said, fairly regularly. So just to kind of summarize, some of these concerns and challenges Francis has already dealt with. Obviously, as archives had to be kept in secure storage, we're heavily reliant on the catalogues as being the first point of contact for most researchers. And therefore, there's an extra burden of responsibility on us as archivists to ensure the correct language and the way things are described, contextualized. It's often difficult in an archive catalogue. It's often required for a great deal of nuance and explanation. We do have to update our language regularly. I know so much in the region is contested in terms of identities or statuses of groups, of even territories as well. It's a very challenging way, challenges to try and navigate that. Even the phrase Middle East, which I'm very unhappy in using, we generally talk about the region at the Institute. In a sense, trying to find a consensus for a suitable alternative has not yet been achieved, and it's something that's ongoing. And these are all things that are part of the discussions we have to have about our archives, about materials. Working within a university has its own challenges too. Again, unlike popular opinion, universities are not very wealthy. There's often very tight bureaucracy and restrictions. There's often opportunities to make positive change, to reach out to people, to try and engage more with communities. And as, like Francis, I do hope to try and have more engagement with the communities whose lives and histories are represented in our archives, and collaborating to try and find ways to use and reshape the use of these. The Kurdish Digital Archive has many other activities as well in terms of conferences and outreach. Just lastly, we do work quite closely with a number of other archive institutions, and these are some examples of work that I've done in different parts of Kurdistan, giving talks on archives, working with setting up digitization projects and manuscript preservation, providing training, professional support, financial support as we can. And hopefully, as I said to somebody in Somali a few months ago, that the era of material being sent to Britain for so-called safekeeping is over, and our role should really be to try and provide the professional technical support to enable archivists in the region to preserve material themselves from now on. Though, of course, as we see in Gaza with the pistonocide, destruction of records, that is a very difficult and volatile challenge to face. It is by no means clear how we do that. Thank you.